My sponsor for this video is not Gillette, and their razors suck.
The world is weird and makes me mad, but at least I get to talk about it with Jose.
In January of 2019, Gillette released an ad titled, "We Believe the Best Men Can Be," Gillette short film, about the danger of toxic masculinity, and to sell razors, of course. In some corners of the internet, this was taken as a direct assault on men and masculinity, and the outrage helped fuel this ad to reach millions of viewers. The story of using socially progressive messaging in advertising has already been told in a great video by H. Bomber Guy, and you can go watch that if you want a bit more detail on how these companies use these methods to sell their products. This video isn't about that though. It's about what happened with the Gillette outrage a few months later. In July of 2019, Procter & Gamble, Gillette's parent company, announced in its fourth quarter earnings report that it was writing down the value of its Gillette assets by $8 billion. The reaction from the outrage mob was predictable. Lots of crowing and patting themselves on the back, and people were hurriedly adding yet another entry to the spurious list of things that went woke and got broke. Which is still ridiculous because this write-down has nothing to do with the ad in question. One of the common misconceptions about this $8 billion loss is that it reflects a dramatic drop in sales of Gillette products. A quick look at the sales figures tells us this is impossible. Gillette is part of Procter & Gamble's grooming division, a division that, in all of its 2019 fiscal year, had sales of $6.2 billion, roughly a 5% drop from last year's $6.6 billion. So obviously that's not a drop of $8 billion. And even though the ad came out in January, Procter & Gamble's fiscal year actually ends in June, so it would only have about 5 months of sales to lose $8 billion. This write-down wasn't about millions of people leaving the Gillette brand en masse. Unlike certain critics, let's actually read the whole article to get a better understanding of what happened here. It quite clearly calls this $8 billion a write-down. This is when a company looks at the assets it has and lowers their value based on demand in the market. Here's a small example to explain that. Let's say we have a piece of clothing, such as jorts. And you're a company that has a warehouse full of jorts in the midst of a jorts craze sweeping the world. You would record that stash of jorts as an asset in your books, and you'd value it based on the high price people are currently paying for jorts. As time goes by, humanity comes to its senses and realizes that jorts are, in fact, ugly clothing no sane person would wear. As demand goes down, the average price for jorts goes down with it, and that warehouse full of jorts you have is now worth substantially less. While the physical asset of jorts remains completely unchanged throughout this time period, their value in the marketplace has gone down, and a responsible company would need to update this value in its books by writing it down. And we're seeing something similar happen here with razors. Although razor technology hasn't changed dramatically, it's men's fashion that has been changing over the last decade, and beards are very fashionable these days. Less guys shaving means less guys are buying razors. There's also the fact that the population, at least in the United States, and older men generally don't shave themselves as frequently as younger men. Add into the fact that Gillette, which once had very little in the way of competition, is now facing some serious resistance from companies like Harry's and Dollar Shave Club. Suddenly, you've got a brand that's having a much tougher time selling its products, and Gillette's sales over the past decade reflect that, showing a steady decline in year-over-year sales. Procter & Gamble also reported that its global sales are less profitable due to currency fluctuations around the world. That's a whole other topic in finance that I'm even less qualified to speak about. The point is that Gillette's trouble as a brand had been well known for some time. Here's an article from back in 2017, demonstrating that Gillette as a brand was having a tough time. Let's keep one thing straight though. Gillette still has a massive market share. There are a lot of different estimates of this, but I've seen numbers from everywhere between 50 to 60%. But that's a far cry from the 70% it once claimed. It means that this incredibly profitable business is now only fairly profitable. It stands to reason that a brand that doesn't make as much money as it used to isn't going to be worth as much in the marketplace. Procter & Gamble purchased Gillette in 2005 for the enormous sum of $57 billion. And while Gillette showed strong growth in the years that followed, in the early 2010s, it demonstrated a sizable decline, meaning if Procter & Gamble were to try and sell Gillette on the market today, it's quite likely it wouldn't fetch quite as high a price. A write-down is an accounting technique used to reflect this new reality. It also lets the parent company, in this case Procter & Gamble, lower its tax burden. If it's reporting to its government that its assets are worth $8 billion less than previously reported, that's $8 billion they won't have to pay taxes on at the end of the year. The annual earnings report this was all announced in also announced very strong sales and overall growth for the Procter & Gamble company. So when this news went public, the market, being aware of how all this works, wasn't dissuaded by the write-down and instead focused on the strong sales growth, decided to buy up shares of Procter & Gamble and sent the stock to a record high. This obviously flies in the face of the idea that a commercial about toxic masculinity ruined Gillette and cost them $8 billion. Not that right-wing media outlets let it stop them from running countless stories about just that. My absolute favorite comes from the Washington Examiner, which originally ran an article with a headline reading, "Gillette CEO, $8 billion losses, price worth paying over #MeToo campaign," which would later be updated with this correction. Correction. The Washington Examiner has updated the story to remove the suggestion that Gillette lost $8 billion due to its Me Too-inspired advertising campaign. We regret that this article did not adhere to the Washington Examiner's normal standards and procedures, and the headline had to be changed to, "Gillette CEO, losing customers over #MeToo campaign is price worth paying." How many customers were lost? Did it have a meaningful impact? This article can't really tell us, and that's kind of the point. It's just a bunch of noise. But did this ad actually have an impact? I want to look at the sales numbers one more time. In this annual data, we can see sales for Gillette have been going down for a long time. The last 8 years in particular have not been kind to the brand. And when did this commercial debut? Right about here. When trying to measure the value of the Gillette brand and its associated assets, one of the key metrics is going to be how much it earns via sales. And if poor sales are responsible for lowering its value, this has been a problem long before the ad about toxic masculinity. You could argue that, unlike Nike, this ad didn't do much to help Gillette. And that seems like a fair assessment. It's not like this ad and the media storm that followed really turned the brand's fortunes around. There's all sorts of reasons why this could be true. People are probably more likely to make a political statement through their fashion choices rather than through whatever grooming products they have in their washroom. But the argument that being woke destroyed Gillette's business, especially when it still makes over $6 billion a year, isn't anywhere close to true. And with that, we can put this story to bed. Another bad argument in the long line of trash fire arguments about getting woke and going broke. So why the hell am I talking about a story that's nearly a year old? One of my most downvoted videos is Why Get Woke Go Broke is a Lie. While I'd like to think it's because the title should obviously have been Get Woke Go Broke is a joke, the truth is, according to the comments, that I was avoiding the much stronger examples of how inserting woke politics into anything turns off a mainstream audience. Chief among those examples is the Gillette $8 billion loss, which dribbles into the comments section of that video on a regular basis. I always found it strange that I kept seeing these comments. An obviously false story about a single ad costing a company $8 billion should make someone skeptical, or at least raise some alarms. That's obviously a sensational story. Even if you're someone inclined to believe the whole get woke, go broke thing, this should still make you pause. Doesn't it seem a little far-fetched? I think what we need to consider is that when people spread this talking point, they aren't trying to demonstrate their knowledge of a subject, but rather their membership in a group. In recent years, psychologists have been anxiously studying the expansion of fake news ever since social media started becoming such a pervasive spreader of it. Recent research shows us, quite depressingly, that false news not only spreads widely on the internet, it also spreads much quicker than real news. This is especially true for anything considered political. According to a review of the research published by the American Psychological Association, facts tend to be spread by partisans on the left and the right at the same rate, regardless of whether or not that information is true. Part of the reason this information is spread on social media is not the desire to inform our contemporaries, but to signal that we are, in fact, part of the same political group. Daniel Kahan, a professor of law and psychology at Yale Law School, offers some insight, using the politically contentious topic of climate change. If you take an ordinary member of the public, his or her carbon footprint is too small to make an effect on climate change. If they make a mistake on the science in that part of their life, nothing bad happens to them. But they can be adversely affected if they're holding a deviant view on an identity-defining issue inside their social group. In other words, when someone shows up to my comments section to mention a talking point that never had any weight behind it, they aren't honestly hoping to change my mind. They're just letting me, and any other commenters, know that they belong to a certain political group, one that opposes the group I represent. And when watching some of the videos on YouTube pushing narratives like Get Woke, Go Broke that have a tenuous connection to any sort of evidence, you can see how they're constructed not to provide greater context or understanding, but instead taking a news story and placing it into a more exciting narrative, one that binds its audience together. They're going there to have their opinions reinforced and to see other people in the comments section or on Twitter who feel the exact same way that they do. They may go on to other social media platforms where they continue to signal to one another that they're in the same social circle. No one really understands anything that they're talking about, but they've at least identified their compatriots, their friends, their community. And that's what this is all about. It's about building communities and making friends. And on its face, that's a lovely thing. Making friends and building a community is something everyone wants, and I generally recommend. But where it goes wrong is when it's centered around blindly following someone who's deeply ignorant of politics, or worse yet, misrepresenting the news of the day to advance a toxic political agenda. Some of the most successful YouTube and Twitch channels are built on this idea of community, and some creators use that language quite openly. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, but what I would hope that you as a viewer do is take some time to consider what positions are required to be a member of that community and what cost is associated with ignoring them. And then ask yourself, have I really thought about this? Have I spent the time really digging into and trying to understand these issues that are apparently central to my social circle that I'm now a part of? And that's true of commentary channels on the right and left. A recent piece of research to come out of the University of Regina in Saskatchewan, Canada, argued that it isn't political affiliation alone that's to blame for the spread of fake news on the internet. Researchers argue that it's actually a case of lazy thinking, and that when people think more critically about the news they're seeing, they're less likely to engage with the spread of fake news, regardless of political affiliation. David Rand, PhD, professor of management science and brain and cognitive sciences at MIT, explains. Our findings suggest that getting people to reason more is a good thing. When you're on social media, stop and think. So the next time you're on social media and you see a sensational news story, especially one you're inclined to agree with, take some time to think about it before rushing to share it with your friends. It's probably too much to expect this one video to change someone's deeply held political beliefs, but I hope anyone watching will at least be less willing to spread bogus news stories in an effort to take the other side down a peg. And when it comes to your own personal beliefs and the arguments that sustain them, never be afraid of an honest challenge or conversation or debate. At the end of the day, you'll either make your existing beliefs stronger or you'll be able to adopt something that's better and more accurately reflects the truth. And if you're in one of those communities where you have to believe something that's either obviously not true or can only be believed if you refuse to actually engage with evidence or facts, maybe consider that this group isn't the one for you. For the longest time, I've been meaning to make a video about how to disagree amongst our own side, that is to say, within the left. I'm a very big believer that debate and conversation, and when I say debate, I don't necessarily mean live debates, which often feel more like theater than anything else. Not that there's anything wrong with theater, of course. Theater is a lovely and sometimes necessary thing. But I think it's very important that we create a space where we feel free to debate and discuss our ideas in a way to make them better, stronger, and more resistant to challenge from parties who we may find ourselves at odds with politically. Sometimes that means ideas we have aren't great. They need to grow, evolve, or sometimes they need to be dropped entirely depending on the arguments involved. Sometimes we might need to bring them back if there's some new argument is brought for them. That's one of the lovely things about discussion and discourse. And when I say debate, I'm talking about real issues, not stuff like, let's talk about like climate change as if that's not an obvious scientific reality. This video initially wasn't supposed to be about any of that, but the Gillette thing, it really bugged me and I wanted to talk about it. Not because I care about Procter & Gamble and Gillette. I actually don't like them at all. I don't use their razors usually, and I think they're pretty bad and overpriced. If you take anything away from the Gillette section of this video, it's just don't buy their products, or do. I don't care. It's your life, your face. Choose whatever you want. And if you want to support this channel, you can sign up to become a patron, or you can sign up for a fancy YouTube membership. You'll get your name in the credits, access to my awesome theme songs, and you'll also, most excitingly, get early access to videos before they go up. It's really cool and fun, and you should consider doing it. If you'd like to support this channel in a non-financial way, consider liking, commenting, subscribing, hitting the bell, and thank you so much for watching.